Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Friday morning episode. And we've got a space special this morning. We're going to be joined by Andy Bowyer, the CEO with Kleos Space, looking at their Polar Vigilance mission, and we'll have a look at their Q2 21 results and updates. Kleos Space, if you didn't know, is an ASX-listed company and also listed on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. And Andy is joining us from, I think he said Maryland in the US. So he's on the east coast of the US, near DC. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Andy Bowyer, CEO of Kleos Space. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Chris, great to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Great. And it's great to have you back, mate. It's been, I think, late last year we had you on. And yeah, I think, and you hadn't really... I was going to say, and we had a really good pre-interview, and sorry to the audience you weren't involved. We had a really very good pre-interview chat. So hopefully I can sort of capture much of what we talked about there. But maybe introduce us to Kleos Space. And as an update, you've now got 2 clusters of satellites launched, and you're now looking into your 3rd cluster. And so, yeah, maybe talk us into 2021 and how it's been, and Kleos Space as a business as well. And welcome for you to start where it suits.
Thank you. I'll give it a very quick intro. So Kleos Space is a defense company. We're using satellites flying in space to collect information about what's happening around the world, in particular around where there is radioactivity. Why that's important to our customers is people want to know where humans are, where human activity is. And by tracking communication activity, whether it's through walkie-talkies or mobile phones or sat phones and what have you, you start to get an indication as to where there's human activity. Where that becomes interesting is where you weren't expecting it to be, near your coastlines or near your borders or near ships that you're needing to protect, near assets that need to protect. So starting to look at lots and lots of different applications. We work in many different verticals, but the important thing is that our satellites are collecting data. We're providing that data as a service to our customers. Basically, they access a database with some data in it. They pay a subscription. They have a license to access a little bit or a lot, depending on how much they pay. And that's the model. So the business model is quite similar to software as a service, but it's a data set. We own and operate our own satellites, so we own the infrastructure, and we sell our data either direct to integrators, to analysts, or we sell through resellers who look after individual marketplaces. And we've got some fantastic resellers all around the world. So yeah, it's a very, very quick intro.
I was going to say, sorry, and maybe that business model we mentioned is very similar to the satellite imagery services as well, but now you've got sort of RF frequency and detection data as well, just selling the raw data.
Right. So the whole world that we work in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance is all about layering data sets. Getting an idea as to where there's communication, where there's radioactivity, that's where we sit in there. But layering into that is the imagery guys, synthetic capture radar imagery, optical imagery, AIS, weather, etc. And all of that information content is called activity-based intelligence. And our data is really sold very similar to imagery by square kilometer or million square kilometers, as the case may be in our case. So we launched our first cluster in November last year. There are scouting mission. Our demonstrators, the ones that are working through all of the space systems, getting the whole thing operational. We're the first company in the world to fly clusters of 4 satellites in formation, really close together. So there's like a diamond that work in 2 pairs that fly amongst each other as they're going around the orbit. It's incredibly complex, but by doing that, we get a very accurate location of those radio transmitters on the ground. So it's quite unique. But the scouting mission satellites are now they're working or fully functional, delivering data down to the ground. That gets processed by our algorithms and gets sent to the customer. Our second cluster that was launched just a few weeks ago is really, it's already twice as powerful as the first one. Right. The tech is just exploding in terms of capability in space. It's a great time to be working in the industry because we can get more and more and more out of each asset that we're launching. So our second cluster are going through the commissioning phase, and we're currently building our third cluster. why we need more than one set of satellites is the more that we see the same place on Earth, the more data we can collect, and that data becomes more valuable to the customer. I was using the example a little bit earlier on in terms of, it's similar to financial data, that if you had a data point once a day for a particular stock, it's interesting and it's fine, but if you could get that data point 20 times a day, 50 times a day, and you could get it more, nearer real time, it becomes much more valuable to you. Not just 50 times more valuable, but actually exponentially more valuable. And that's exactly the same in our data set. So that's where we are.
Well, I was going to say, do you still compete with other satellites up there that might have radio frequency tracking, or is it you're very focused on your market and who you're collecting the data for, and therefore it is more valuable? Because again, you're about to have all your clusters. That the 3 was the main one, isn't it? So by the end of this year, all your clusters will be done.
No,
and you're in business, or you got more?
We will plan to launch more clusters as we grow as a business over the next 12 to 24 months, because literally, the more data, the more satellites we have, the more data we can collect, the more data we have to sell. We're selling our data based on million square kilometers collect per hour. So we have a time associated with that. The more volume of data you have, the more valuable it is to the customer, and our subscription rates go up and up.
Got it.
So it's just a volume issue. So
I've got a recollection to how many clusters you might be doing. What is the ballpark number of clusters? Is it 50 or 60? Is it that many?
The very maximum you would ever launch is be 20.
20.
And the reason
okay.
why that is because if you were to launch 21, you don't get any benefit above your 20th.
So enough to cover the globe, right?
It goes up over a curve, basically.
Got it.
So what we believe the sweet spot is probably 8 to 12, but this is about reacting to customer demand. If the customer's demanding more and more data more often, and they're paying for it, we've got the ROI, the IRRs on our capex. We'll keep launching satellites and reacting to that customer demand. That's another good thing about this type of space industry and the way the space industry's gone is that, under a year, we can be changing, reacting to new customer demand, new customer requirements, launching new satellites, and delivering more capability to, either the military user, the warfighter, or the commercial customer.
Now, there's different ways to go. From the business perspective, you're listed on the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and also the Australian Security Stock Exchange. You've been growing your team there in the US as well. You're in the US also. And then we talked about that second cluster that just went up. That's the Polar Vigilance satellites. They're at a 500 to 600 kilometer Sun Synchronous orbit aboard, and they went up on the SpaceX Transporter-2. So maybe let's talk about the clusters and how the industry, how you engage with setting up these launches and getting a satellite into space. Excuse me. As a sort of a public company or as a private company, as you do, how have you found the process? Are you finding it's getting easier now? And how tightly do you hold that desk when the launch is happening? Because the Transporter-2 got delayed a couple of times, and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah, look, it's easier than it used to be. I've worked in the space sector for a long time, and a lot of my colleagues in the company have done. We've got a lot of experience in this sector.
Yeah.
And take for instance, we worked on a mission to go to Mercury called Bepi Colombo that was delayed 7 years at the launch site. So that's sort of like old space. It kind of where things were. That's a bit of an extreme example, but things can get delayed.
Still, yeah.
But it was kind of normal. People would expect a year delay for things,
Yeah.
but things being launched. And I think the thing that's changed that really SpaceX have spearheaded is getting much more reliable launches and them launching on time. Give or take a week or two. It's never going to be on the minute you decide a year earlier, but give or take a week or two, they're launching pretty accurately. When they say they're going to go, they're going to go. And that is almost more important than the price of the launch, because as a business, you can't make money. We can't generate income until the satellites are in space. It's impossible for us to do that. So it's absolutely imperative that they get launched on time and reliably. And I think that's really where SpaceX has done a fantastic job. I mean, the prices have come down a lot. You know, SpaceX advertised their pricing. It's way below where we were just even 3-4 years ago. And that was half the price it was 5 years ago. You know,
Wow.
it's really coming down. My sense is that it's probably plateauing. You know, I don't think there's a lot more to come out of it, because there's only a limited number of customers. There's not infinite customers, and you still have a basic cost of launch, the fuel, etc., etc. So I think we are where we are. Just to go back, you know, how we contract that. We work through a launch broker. We work through a company called Spaceflight. They're in Seattle in the US, and they basically broker launches for your satellites on all sorts of different launch vehicles. And why we use something like Spaceflight rather than going direct to SpaceX is that if we were to have a problem, or SpaceX to have a problem, we can switch our launch provider and give us more flexibility. So they kind of broker these great pricing structures, give you the ability to pay a little bit less than you would do direct. And so we work through partners like that.
And you also have to go to different providers or launch providers as well, based on the orbit you're looking for. Because I think the first one went up on your scouting mission went up on an Indian or from an Indian launch.
That's right. So the depending on where the launch is coming from, you have limited options with regard which orbit you're going into. And because we are always rideshare, you know, our satellites are quite small. We're not spending the 40-50 million on to be the prime contractor on a launcher. We're always the bit on the side, paying a little bit. Those guys are defining where the launch goes to, and so you're a little bit restricted by that sort of thing. But it just means that as you build out your constellation, i.e. the multiples of clusters, you can plug holes in that constellation in different ways, and we track all of that, what's going on, as you'd imagine.
And I take it, how long are these satellites going to last for? I imagine, because this is we talked about maybe up to 20 clusters, you might have a sweet spot of 12. I take it over time you'll have a work program where those satellites may return down and you put new ones up. So this is an ongoing thing.
There's some positives to that. So we have a mission life of about 5 years, a design life, that is. That works out quite nicely in the model, because it means that you've got 5 years of amortization and, you know, booking revenues against that particular asset, that particular CapEx asset. However, it does also mean that there's a natural refresh, because the tech is moving so fast in terms of advances. You want really the latest and greatest up there, otherwise you'll end up in a position where you're getting overtaken, or so really it forces you to always be on top of the latest technology, and it makes it quite dynamic in that sense, which is a lot of fun, but it also keeps you really at the bleeding edge of technology.
If I can, maybe slightly off topic, but how do you bring those satellites back? I take it it's all part of the way space is kind of regulated now. They come back safely. There's no space junk down there. They do return.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, there isn't actually a law which makes you do that, which is quite surprising. However, we're a responsible space operator. So what that means is that you actively deorbit your satellites to the point where they demise within the Earth's atmosphere. So we, to all intents and purposes, when they've come to the end of their useful life, we use the propulsion on board, because they've got lots of propulsion on, use the propulsion on board to deorbit them past the ISS orbit, bring them down to 100 kilometers or something like that. They then, gravity pulls them down within a couple of months, basically at that point, and then they burn up into the Earth's atmosphere quite safely and environmentally safely, etc. So they're we basically remove them from orbit, and that's much more the way that things are working in low Earth orbit these days. You're filling it up, but you're refreshing all the time and clearing the orbit. So it does help. There's still debris up there, which is a challenge, like very old debris at times from previous issues with satellites. So there's always you have to track all of that debris. We have all sorts of programming in place in order to track that. And if the things are too close, we can perform maneuvers to move out of the way. That's another reason.
I think that's another key aspect of your clusters. You can move them. So particularly even for client requirements, you can adjust them. And that was one of the questions I had is how have things adapted now? You've got your clusters up or a couple up there, and how much has the business changed or adaptation that you've needed as a result now that you're in kind of operation? How much change have you needed to make?
I don't think we were far off with what we thought the customer was going to want. We understand the areas of interest that people want to see because they're the kind of obvious ones around the world where there is a threat or where there's issues with overseas interests. I think things like we've got some fantastic people involved in the business, particularly on the sort of front-facing, government customer-facing route with Pete Brown, Karen Hayes Ryan, and we've got these incredible characters who are touching a customer friend, and they're touching that market all the time because they've been in the domain. So that's really helped us predefine those requirements. I think the thing that we have really noticed is there's been no let up in excitement, and actually we're even finding new applications that customers are interested in the data that we didn't even dream of. There is there was an example the other day that somebody was talking about a challenge they've got with illegal mining in the middle of jungles, etc., where people are setting up a mining camp to mine something illegally, and they're coordinating all of that through radios because it's short range, gives them the ability to be safe. It's all hidden. It's very hard to see from space from an imagery perspective. And if we can say, hold on, there's some radio activity in the middle of the jungle there that you weren't expecting to see, we don't know if it's mining or not because all we know is there's some human activity. They then can queue an image, go and send a plane, go and investigate it further. That's fantastic.
And I take it like illegal forestry would be another one, illegal forestry as well, I imagine. And also,
exactly,
anything remote.
Exactly that. So anything where there is, very remote areas where people think they can do whatever they want and are getting away with illegal activity, whether it's, the sort of drug cartels are operating their own cell phone networks. Well, if you can detect cell phone towers where they shouldn't be, then that's interesting to the intelligence community. And that's, I think, the fascinating thing is that the depth of application is beyond what we originally thought, which was probably quite narrow in its field.
Yeah.
So that means the more applications, the more subscribers there are, and that's something we're encouraging.
It's a good thing, even if you had a narrow view, but you still had the business case. So obviously to find more applications is also good from that business case. Now, maybe let's have a look at the Q2 update. You've been signing on. One thing you'll find, and I better disclose I'm a shareholder in Kleos as well. It's not I don't own the farmhouse on it, but enough to keep me interested in what you're doing. And it has been performing quite well. And obviously following your second cluster being launched, you're now moving in. But you've also got new appointments. You mentioned a few names there as well, particularly as head of sales, deals in Japan, South America. How's all that coming through? What's your kind of pipeline and business process to engage with customers early, and you're able to provide data now as well, right?
Yeah, so we've got one of the things we're quite proud of is the pipeline is very, very strong. So we've got about 170 in the pipeline of companies and agreements or people, organizations that we've engaged. We're working through either getting them through into a signed contract position or in discussions to get to that point. So it's a pipeline, and we're working. Really, the whole objective at the moment is to convert that pipeline into backlog, and that's the mission of the sales team, if you like, is to convert pipeline to backlog. Brilliant, and start reporting against backlog instead of just pipeline. Of that pipeline, though, I think what's one of the real strengths of it is its diversity. So, for instance, there's about 70 in there which are government customers. direct government customers, and about 100 that are commercial customers. So we've got some spread there. We're not reliant on one or two government agencies for one or two defense contracts. We've got a big spread there in terms of managing risk. We've also got a diversity across different geographic areas. So it means that we're less reliant on just the USA. You know, we've got about 30% of our business is US at the moment, 30% Europe, 30% South America, Latin America, and you know the rest is kind of Asia Pacific at this moment in time. So we've got a fantastically diverse geography with regard to that pipeline as well, and that again de-risks the pipeline because it means we're not reliant on our local government to just give us a big contract to survive. This is a numbers game. We've got to build subscriber numbers, tap into the addressable market, and grow that subscriber base. From the early stage revenues, you know, we're trying to bring people in at a relatively low level from a subscription level perspective and grow them over the next 12 to 18 months. Come with us on the journey as
I was going to say,
more data, get them kind of addicted to the data, get them hooked. Because once you've got a data set that you trust, it's very sticky. You don't want to chop and change data sets because you're reliant on it from an intelligence perspective. And I think that's a really critical thing, because if you're having to chop and change data, you go back to only having to data.
You have no pattern or life cycle on that. Yeah.
You don't know what happened last year because, you know, as soon as you stop subscribing to our data, you don't have access to it anymore. So it's gone and you have no right to use it anymore. Nobody owns the data set apart from us.
Got it. Oh, so it's in a repository, is it, where they have to access it? It's not like you give it to them and then they go off and.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good business model.
Basically, they access the database or the data lake.
Got it.
Fashionable way of putting it. And via an API, and you drag out the information you need at that particular time. But the license, the license key that you have is the legal document that allows you to use that data. As soon as you stop paying for that, there's no license associated with it anymore. You can't use it anymore. You can't access it. It's gone. So that's why, you know, it's very sticky in that sense. But that's why we're quite careful with pricing, and we make sure that we're getting people in and using it, and we're supporting them and building that network of analysts up and making sure they trust us and they'll work with us. And this is a long game in that sense. You know, it's about building trust and relationships in this industry, and the defense sector is all about that trust.
Well, one of the things I want to at least cover, you being an ASX listed company, we've been looking at the Australian space sector for a while as well. Do you have Australian customers? Have you been getting support from the Australian space sector?
Yeah, so we have a channel partner, as we call them in Australia, called SIPAC. Fantastic defense and security company. They basically support our direct Australian customers there in you know, the DoD.
So they resell?
So, yeah, but it's a bit more than just resell. They have the technical capability to integrate and support the customer base.
Got it. Okay.
So you know, that was I think really important for particularly this day and age where there's no traveling. You know, I couldn't get into Australia.
We're in lockdown too, mate. So yeah.
Well, that's the reason why I can't get in. Yeah, so you know, there's you need those trusted partners, and also you know we then are leveraging their relationship with the customer that already exists, and that speeds up the route to market. It speeds things up in terms of, you know, we don't have to wait a year to bid for a big contract. They're already working in those contracts.
And monitoring the market for you too.
Yeah, so we have to give up some margin, of course we do, in exchange for that. But that is that you can price these things in, and that's the right way to do it.
Well, that's one of the key challenges, isn't it? When you're dealing globally, you've got to scale. So you've got to scale everything that you do from a business. Maybe let's finish off with where you see the industry going. You know, again, you're a quarter of a way through maybe your pipeline of clusters and the like. What time frame do you look at that? And then also the way we talked about convergence in pre-interview as well, where potentially you got imagery, now you got RF, and you've got other sort of sort of satellites up there doing different jobs, and how there might be a bit of convergence in the sector. Yeah, what's your pipeline or sort of time frame for getting the rest of the clusters up? What's 2022 looking like, so to speak, and then thoughts on,
so
the industry as a whole?
A couple of ways of looking at that, and I think the best way of answering it is we are tracking our constellation growth based on customer demand.
Yeah.
So you know, and adoption, because there's a difference oftentimes the demand you get from a customer and their adoption rate, and how long it takes for them to turn into a revenue generating customer from them being very excited. So how long that adoption rate takes, we will tune our constellation and capex spend to match where the adoption sits, and we're able to do that. But it's roughly, we could have everything launched by the end of 2022 physically, but there's no point in doing that just yet. We will ramp it up a little bit slower than that over the next 12 to 24 months, basically.
So you're going to bed down the current clusters. You got nothing planned for 2022, because how far do you have to sort of schedule if you want to put a cluster
you really need a year. So yeah, we are certainly working on designs for 2022. Right. Absolutely. We have a chief innovation officer that's looking at not just the near-term capabilities, but he's horizon scanning for what's being invented next that we can leverage.
Because it might be worth waiting. Yeah, it might be worth waiting 6 months for some new tech, right? Yeah.
Capability might double next year because of a new piece of tech. So we're working, we're horizon scanning, scouting for those new pieces of technology, and they'll be deployed when it's appropriate to do so. So yes, we're absolutely working on next year's technologies and clusters and capability, because we're getting customer requirements for 22 and 23.
Yeah.
We understand what's going to be needed. So I think in terms of the marketplace, the way you look at Earth observation or intelligence collection from commercial satellites, if you'd rather, it breaks down in these silos based on the part of the frequency that you're looking at. So in our case, we have this very sort of specific, we have to fly clusters in order to geolocate. We're looking at RF radio transmissions, very specific in the vertical of defense security, really. That complements AIS providers that are collecting AIS data. So that's emanating from ships, or ADS-B from planes. So tracking systems, we're finding the things that aren't being tracked. Tracking systems finding things that are being tracked. Those two things naturally come together really nicely. Then you start to bring in confirmatory pieces of information like imagery. What is actually happening there? If we can find the needle in the haystack and say, go and take a photo here, tell us what's going on, that data, that imagery data, becomes much quicker to look at, because our data is structured. It's points on a map.
And you can beat, and I take it because it's radio frequency, you can beat the imagery. You're faster. We talked about latency before, making sure that there's no latency in the data sets coming through. I take it you're a faster data set too, potentially,
in the sense that because we're delivering a structured data, we're giving people a geospatial data point.
Yeah.
Imagery is unstructured because it is a photo. So you're looking at when you get that photo. We're telling you what to look at because we're giving you a point on the map. If you can match that point on a map with an image, you turn the unstructured data into structured data. That's what the analyst wants. He wants to know where to look. If you speed that whole thing up, that's our value proposition. That's how we sell the data to the analyst. So you've then got these silos of different imagery: optical, which is normal photos, and synthetic capture radar imagery, which is more like the gray pictures you see that see through clouds, but they're very, very high resolution, but very big data sets. They need tipping and queuing from other data sets. And then you also have weather that sits alongside that, because weather affects human activity massively, because the drug runners are moving from South America over to the west coast of Africa to bring drugs up into Europe. They're only moving when the weather's good. They're not traveling through hurricanes and what have you. So the weather is super important to that. So you bring all these data sets together, you start to look at the marketplace, the industry, and I think it's ripe for consolidation, that you've got different sensor suites, that if you can start to bring those together into a single capability, that's very, very powerful for a customer, rather than them being individual suppliers. I think there's some really interesting things to look at in the next 12 to 24 months.
Very much, and also quite troubling for transnational organised crime too. They must be thinking, okay, we're going to have to potentially have to adapt or be moving a lot faster with people on our ass.
Yeah, there's people will always to try and obfuscate. They'll always try and perform crime because they make money.
But they still need to communicate.
But they still need to communicate. They still need to move things around. They still need to know where other people are, and it's really, and also they also run different systems to make sure they don't run into stuff because they don't want to crash.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
There's all sorts of different radio activity that goes on with illegal or illicit activity, and that makes it quite interesting. And it's very, very hard. I mean, it's very hard for a professional Navy to go radio dark. Because they need radios to all sorts of things, but you can imagine an unprofessional sort of illegal activity. It's very difficult.
Well, look, the other one, you've also started a podcast TV kind of update as well, I've noticed. So
yeah,
what's maybe what's a call to action for anyone watching or interested in this as well, and they can obviously get involved on the share market. But yeah, you've got a communication strategy now. You've got to keep, there's so much happening.
We've got a fantastic communication manager who's come in relatively recently. She's brought a whole load of energy and ideas into it. And the objective of this Insight series was to kind of get behind the scenes a little bit, to the way that we're going about business, getting people to understand how the systems work, how the satellites work. So we had the first one was the Chief Technology Officer, Vinny, being interviewed by somebody internal, one of our sales execs. And it would make for a really, I loved watching it. I thought it was fantastic because I really, they're both amazing guys, and I love them both. But getting them together was it was fun, and it came across fun. So we're going to try and do them once every month, every 6 weeks, and bring in different parts of the business so that we can explain, okay, well, what's our pricing strategy and how does that work, and what does data as a service really mean, and just trying to get people understanding what makes the business tick a little bit more, so that rather than just me talking all the time, because people are fed up with me talking all the time, how do you get other people involved? And I think that's really, it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, and that's what we try to do on here as well, Andy. You can see we've gone over time slightly anyway, and it's hard to talk about a company like Kleos in half an hour with so much going on. So we really do appreciate your time. We'll have you on again for sure. We'll just keep monitoring this over time. It's a long story to be told, and also maybe potentially even other members of the team coming on. Always happy to have you on. And Kleos Space, their quarter update was released, their activities update. They've got a whole bunch of people joining their team as well, and quite high caliber people as well. Your hiring strategy looks really good. Great communication strategy, and very, very increasing prominence, I suppose, in the space sector overall as well. So you should be very proud.
It's a cool industry, and I appreciate your time and thoughts always, and the opportunity to communicate is very welcome. So thanks for everything you do.
Beautiful. Well, look, mate, I'll let you go. It's evening time for you there. Enjoy the rest of your night. Don't drink too much of that iced coffee there. You won't be able to go to sleep.
Yeah.
All right. Look, Andy Bowyer, the CEO with Kleos Space. Thank you very much for your time. I'll let you go.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Andy. Cheers.
Yeah, bye.